Hi everyone. This video is going to be a little different from my usual. I'm going to be just having a little ice cream here and talking about my current reads, and this is just spur of the moment, so I missed this last weekend's video because I'd been traveling the previous week and came back on Friday night and then just needed that 3-day weekend we had to recover. So yeah, just didn't really have time to put together something a little more scripted or anything, but I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about what I read on the trip, and yeah, I'm gonna have some ice cream. So what did I read on the trip? I brought a bunch of books, as I usually do. I think there's like a 3-to-1 ratio of books I bring and books I actually read on trips. So the book I actually read here is The Cold War, A Very Short Introduction by Robert McMahon. And when I say I read it, I mean I made a pretty good dent in it. I still have one chapter left, so almost done with it. Going to finish it in the next day or two. But I like these little books, as you can see, for scale. Like, they are genuinely pocket-sized and fit in all the little spaces in your suitcase where, you can bring a book and not have to worry about bulk so much. But in any case, this is actually the first book in the series that I have, almost finished. I've heard so much about these. SRK on Instagram really likes them. Just in general, like, they're considered to be a good place to start if you want to get introduced to a topic. In my case, I had taken several history courses in college that, touched on the Cold War in some way, whether from a historical, history of Russia, USSR perspective, or from a geopolitical, international affairs perspective. So reading this is more like I want to refresh my mind, see how much I remember and what I've forgotten. And I found a lot of names and things were coming back, but this kind of helped me get reacquainted with definitions of things and, get reacquainted with this very large period of history. And another reason for reading it right now, other than the fact that I just picked it up randomly at the bookstore months ago, is, a lot of these countries that figured heavily in the Cold War are the same ones we're talking about today. So I was personally curious to, be digging into that and understanding the dynamic between the United States, Russia, and China over the course of the 20th century and what we might learn from that today. So, and in my opinion, I think we're still kind of living in the shadow of the Cold War in so many ways. If you think about the way different world leaders, the kind of rhetoric they use, and the kind of cultural, political, even economic in some cases, messaging that they're using in their speeches and stuff, kind of harkens back sometimes to events of several decades ago. This is one of my favorite ice creams. This is pistachio and honey that Kroger puts out, or they're called Fred Meyer on the West Coast. But anyway, so what have I learned from this, right? Here's so I had one sticky note in this book, and I don't know where the rest of these little diamond sticky notes are that I like so much. So I had one sticky note, right, and I had to choose one thing to note. Talk about a challenge. Here's a choice quote that I landed on. The East-West division in Europe, by way of contrast, achieved a remarkable degree of stability. The very idea of a military conflict there became increasingly unpalatable to Soviet and American leaders, who recognized that any major confrontation in the center would almost certainly turn nuclear. It is particularly telling that virtually all of the wars that erupted during the Cold War era were waged on Third War soil, and that all but 200,000 of the estimated 20 million people who died in wars fought between 1945 and 1990 were felled in conflicts that raged across various parts of the Third World. So, that 20 million deaths really stood out to me, and I think the Cold War is almost the most ironic of names because it was a hot war in everywhere but the home turf of the major combatants behind the scenes, if you will. So that was something I just wanted to, a thought I wanted to hold. It just puts things in such a different perspective when you think about all the conflicts that actually happened during that time period and the people who really died and lost everything in those conflicts, juxtaposed with the remarkable technological progress and prolific peacetime in the European countries. I mean, relatively speaking, in comparison to like the 19th century, just a big shift there, while, you know, those same governments were backing militaries and various governments in other countries and their civil wars and their international disputes. So just a lot to think about there as we look back on the 20th century. What else? There was a little bit in the news. I think it was CNN just today or maybe a few days ago. They're talking about how Cuba has announced that they've detected human trafficking that Russia has allegedly conducted to get Cubans involved in its war on Ukraine. And there's a little passage in here that talks about how even back in the 70s, in early 1978, Cuban troops supplied and transported by the Soviets routed U.S.-backed Somali forces in fighting over the strategic Ogaden Peninsula, so that's in Africa. And, you know, that's not to say that people were being trafficked back then. I think what's just kind of interesting is how, you know, this little nation of Cuba being, you know, sent to other places to fight wars, whether it's in Africa back then or Ukraine today. It's just kind of mind-boggling, honestly. So, you know, just little things like that where you read it and you're like, oh, that still kind of holds some relevance, or it kind of helps explain something happening today. So this book is chock full of things like that. Obviously, as an introductory text, it is not going to be, you know, your one-stop shop. Like, you're gonna want to pick up on topics in here and dig into them deeper. For example, there's a section on the Cuban Missile Crisis. A really good book to read on that is 13 Days. I forgot which of the Kennedys wrote that. I should know. I think it was Robert F. Kennedy. 13 Days, a memoir of the Cuban Missile Crisis. I read that several years ago and it was really good. Obviously, you know, it's only from one perspective, so it's going to have that bias, but I just thought it was very interesting, and it's one of those things you can, you know, maybe you'll find books from this introduction that you're inspired to read. This has actually a whole further reading section in the back, so it's another nice thing about these books. A reading section, or a suggested reading for each chapter. I don't think, like, having the kinds of friends that I do, and following the kinds of people I do online, you know, I never run out of suggested reading on historical topics, but, you know, if you're just getting started, that would be a really good resource. So, yeah, for whatever reason, I just didn't feel like reading fiction this past week, so I spent a lot of time with this book in planes and airports and hotel rooms. Alright, so what else am I reading here? I'm taking a break from Light in August. You will remember I did an introductory video on that a few weeks ago now, and I got 200 pages into it. It's a 500-page book. I am definitely enjoying it in the sense that Faulkner is really good in this novel at building up tension and drama and sketching characters and taking you back to the characters' childhoods. And it's just, after 200 pages, I felt like I'd been running a marathon and needed to take a break because emotionally and topically, it's just very heavy. I'd mentioned in that previous video that Faulkner spends the first few chapters introducing a realm of characters, but then what he does after that is he delves into the backstory of this particular character named Joe Christmas and the childhood trauma that he endured from his rather horrific childhood, and then allusions to his future life and all the horrible things that he experienced and or did as an adult. So I guess I just felt like a need to take a break from that. So I've picked up East of Eden again. So this is for a couple of read-alongs, including a second attempt at a United States selection for Reading the World. And first of all, I just love this cover. Kind of obsessed. These penguin orange covers are so vivid, aren't they? Anyway, but to the meat and potatoes here. I just read chapter 4 last night, I think, or yesterday. And if I thought I was going to escape from traumatic childhood stories, I was gravely mistaken. It is, it focuses on two families, the Hamiltons and the Trasks. That's as much as I really know so far. It takes place in this Salinas Valley in California. One family is more affluent and they get the good land, and the other family is not so fortunate and they get the bad land in this area. So presumably this book is going to follow how the two families come together and, conflicts and romance probably. And there's biblical allusions in here as well that I'll be looking out for. There's been some already with these two brothers that have been introduced, Charles and Adam Trask. Probably allusions to Cain and Abel with the two brothers, because Adam is more meek and more meek and timid, and Charles is the violent one. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I really do like Steinbeck's writing in here. It's quite, so, previously this year I'd read The Moon is Down. This is different than that obviously, because, here he's trying to build up a sweeping epic. And in The Moon is Down, he was writing a propaganda piece, a very good one, obviously, but, different scope, different purposes. But what I'm liking about East of Eden so far is that he maintains this kind of snappy prose that you see a little bit in The Moon is Down, and that you won't find in someone like Faulkner as much. He's talking here about this kind of, this rather awful guy, this Civil War veteran who is quite an abusive father. And how this Cyrus Trask is his name, how he poses as some great war hero, and has managed to build a reputation for himself largely based on his reading and research of the war, very little actually based on his own experience. But he's created for himself this persona of the war veteran. Where does he say that? Where is that? There was a really good quote here where Steinbeck just kind of sums it up, and I can't find it, but basically Steinbeck describes Cyrus as becoming like a professional old war hero. No one now outside of the War Department knew the quality and duration of his service. His wooden leg was at once a certificate of proof of his soldiering and a guarantee that he wouldn't ever have to do it again. Timidly, he began to tell Alice, his wife, about his campaigns, but as his technique grew, so did his battles. At the very first, he knew he was lying, but it was not long before he was equally sure that every one of his stories was true. So, Steinbeck very masterfully builds up this picture of Cyrus Trask, the fraud, the abuser, the selfish man. And yet, what's really good about this character painting is how it's so believable. You know, Cyrus Trask is a horrible guy, but it's not like so exaggerated that you'd be like, oh, this doesn't seem realistic. No, Cyrus Trask seems like a very plausible figure. And you see a very natural and opposite kind of reaction in his son Adam. Young Adam was always an obedient child. Something in him shrank from violence, from contention, from the silent, shrieking tensions that can rip at a house. He contributed to the quiet he wished for by offering no violence, no contention, and to do this he had to retire into secretness, since there is some violence in everyone. He covered his life with a veil of vagueness, while behind his quiet eyes a rich, full life went on. This did not protect him from assault, but it allowed him an immunity. So, there's certainly a great deal of poetry in Steinbeck's writing, in spite of it being fairly terse compared to, you know, the Wolfes and the Faulkners. And I would say it might even be comparable to Fitzgerald, but Fitzgerald has a more elegant turn of phrase. This feels a little more earthy. Steinbeck doesn't shy away from just kind of telling things like they are. So I really am enjoying his writing, and I think unlike some other famous authors I have tried recently, Hemingway, I don't find Steinbeck to be overhyped as of yet. So it's going to depend, obviously, like how this novel goes. But I've heard nothing but good things about this novel. And one thing that really recommends it to me is the fact that I know some very different people from very different backgrounds and walks of life who just love this novel. And I think that's a really good recommendation for it. At least, you know, if universality is a quality to be found in a classic, which I think most people would somewhat agree that it's somewhat important, you know, that certainly recommends this book. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. I think I'll stop there. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you're reading these days, if you've read East of Eden, and if you have any Cold War recommendations for me. And I'll see you next time. Bye.